Hello! So we're going to be talking about what happens after World War One. The next biggest event after World War One is the Great Depression. So just going on a timeline right here. We know that in November of 1918, World War One ended, and this was it. It really helped that the outcome was greatly impacted by the United States joining in World War One. Same thing happens with World War Two. So we have the November 1918. After everyone comes back from the war, now we have the Roaring Twenties. As in, like, the 1920s. So with this, with the Roaring Twenties, you're seeing like a lot of like the rise of the stock market. Just like the rise of the stock market. And remember, everyone's also taking advantage of everything that happened with the Industrial Revolution, and now they don't have to worry about the war. And also, there were a lot of advances. There were also a lot of reform that happened. And actually, the Great Depression also is the reason that we have a lot of public programs now. So with the Great Depression, it started with a stock market crash. So we have in 1929, this is the stock market crash. So the Great Depression was an international event, but it started here in the United States. After the stock market crashed, and it shouldn't have been a big deal. But since like a lot of people were kind of just getting into like the latest trendy thing at the moment, like get rich quick, they didn't quite understand the whole concept of accounting and then finance principles, that they really panicked and took all their money out of the bank. So then that just like made everything worse. It just created panic, public panic. And if for those of you who have grandparents who lived in that era, or like my great grandmother, she was alive during that era, and they never threw anything away because she lived in during the Great Depression. You know that Tupperware, that little plastic bin that shoes come in, or the little plastic that food comes in, like butter. That was their version of Tupperware. They wouldn't go out and buy Tupperware. Tupperware being like the little plastic or glass things you put your food in. They would just reuse and recycle because they didn't really have much of an option. Another issue that occurred was the Dust Bowl. So for those of you might know like the Kansas area to be like just very dusty and tornado alley, but that wasn't always the case. It was actually a very high producing agricultural area. So then we have 1930s. Really, it was from 1930 to 1936. So let's just scratch that out. 1936. Dust Bowl. So Dust Bowl ruined the agriculture and like the American Midwest. So ruined agriculture. So like all of those people just lost their livelihood. They were out of jobs, and then hey, all of these other industries that depended on like that food or those other products made no longer had their raw product. It affected them as well. Um, this is why you hear the term supply chain management is very important. This is exactly what it means. So like the dust storms made it bad, but then the people weren't used to. They didn't know about their how to deal with the dry land. They kept on doing the same methods, expecting something different to occur. Let me tell you, you can't do the same thing expecting different results. I mean, it's very obvious, but it's human nature. We try to keep on doing the same thing. And this is what happened with the farmers. They did not adapt to dryland farming techniques. So all of these people just lost their livelihood. So all of this just made it even worse. Like this, Dust Bowl was one factor. Two, people didn't adapt. I mean, it's not like everyone had college degrees back in the day. I mean, elementary schooling was kind of starting out to be like the new standard. So because of this, erosion occurred. We're going to cover this in the science portion. It just means that the nice, nutritious soil, so like this is like, so if we're looking at dirt, the top soil is like very rich, very good for growing. And then if you just strip that away, you end up with more rocky soil that isn't able to hold nutrients for plants to grow. So erosion, so no more agriculture. So it just made it worse. People just lost. It just made it worse. The Dust Bowl came at the worst time. Okay. So as our president started asking like, okay, what can we do to make this better? At the time, the president was called President Hoover, and they started calling people would start losing their homes, and they would have to live like in little cardboard boxes. A lot of people, there was mass suicides during the Great Depression. I mean, depression talks about like economic depression, not like I'm very sad and I feel I feel hopeless kind of way. But it really did lead to a lot of psychological depression among people. Near the very beginning, people would commit suicide. There was a lot of crime because people would rob and like in order to like make, because there was no jobs, and there was also like a lot of soup kitchens. So let me write this down. So there was an increase in crime. Well, increase in poverty. I mean, a lot of people just became poor overnight. Increased poverty. People were being malnourished. There's an increase in crime. And this was crime out of need. It wasn't crime out of boredom. It was necessary for their life. And there was also like just a lot of suicide rates. And you might ask like, hey, this is like a history class. This is not. Well, I mean, suicide is a very important topic that we do. It is part of the social sciences that it is covered. And it is very unfortunate when suicide does occur. And it just shows how people felt very hopeless. That they felt like that their only way out was through suicide. So I think the word Great Depression is also a very accurate measure of how people felt during that time period. Now, then internationally, there was a lot of hurt going on. Governments were eager, very eager, to like turn this around. So we're very, very eager. Some governments or like some individuals took advantage and tried to put themselves in more power, just taking advantage of the situation. People were very desperate. So let me write this down. People are desperate for a solution. So governments can help. They offered a light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, so we're going to keep on talking about the Great Depression, but we're just going to focus now on governments. So, you know how we're talking about how the war to end all wars really didn't happen? Yeah, we ended up getting World War II. So the Great Depression starts making it easier, kind of like plants the seed for World War II. If, whenever there's a war, the losing country might be, is gonna have to give up something, and in the case with World War I, they had to pay reparations. They basically owed money to everyone they had fought against. So Germany was already hurting at the time. Combine this with an international Great Depression, they were hurting even more. So what was a big response was the rise of fascism. You're like, what is fascism? Fascism is a type of government system where it's like a small group of people who are in charge. So it's like it's in a way it's kind of like a monarchy where they have like total control, except that they're not royal blood per se. And I'll spell it out for you right now. Okay, so post-war depths. Great Depression. Add that together, and you get the rise of corrupt governments. So with fascism, it removes the power of the people. So like, let me write this out. So fascism. So like a small elite group has total control. Whereas democracy, that is a typo, or righto democracy. Everyone rules. So, United States, we are a democracy, but we practice democracy through a republic. We have elective representatives, repub. That's why the word rep is in there. It would be considered a lot more efficient because just a little backstory. The Greeks, they did not have elected representatives. Everyone would have to get together in order to decide to do something. Everyone would have to agree. Although this gave rise to a lot of great argumentative styles and philosophy, it led to them being conquered by Romans because the Romans were like, what do you think about that? Yeah, they democracy, when it's just everyone trying to get convinced on the same page, it's very hard, especially when there's groups who have different views. So nonetheless, with the rise of post-war debts and people suffering from the Great Depression, small groups, political groups, knocked out the democracy in Europe and also in different continents as well. So they were able to rise to power. So this is already prequel to World War II. But let's see how the United States handled this. This is other countries, or this is what happened in a lot of other countries, but let's focus on the United States because this is where the exam is. So with the United States, let me just shut the door real quick. So we have President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, we have two President Roosevelts. We have Theodore Roosevelt, who was before World War I, and then we have President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, so when he finally came into office in 1933, he started doing a lot of public initiatives yo, we gotta get this together. People are suffering, we need jobs. He came up with he signed into action the New Deal. And this was a big deal. It gave jobs to people. That's why now we have highways. There are so many people who didn't have a job. He created jobs. Now, how was he able to create these jobs? He made a lot of people government workers. Positions that were building roads, those were just taken upon either on the state level, the county level, but now this became something part of the federal government. That's why we have things called interstates. Typically, the interstate is a better place to drive on than on state highways. If for those of you who are in Texas, you know exactly what I mean. The interstate has lighting, it has 3 or even 4 lanes, whereas the highways, one way is a 2-way with 1 lane, and it's very bumpy and doesn't have shoulders. So he created a lot of jobs that still exist to this day. So let's go over some of these New Deal. So it lowered unemployment. So it lowered unemployment by creating jobs. Now this is something very interesting. How is the government able to gain jurisdiction? government was given more power, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is exactly what these guys did. Yes. Sometimes to take care of the bull, you gotta ride the bull and take it by the horns. So the government did have to step in both situations to help their nation's people. However, with fascism, the small elite group with total control, it's bad intentions are just very easy to occur. When you have total control, some people just won't want to give it up and they'll have their own agenda. But here, that extra controlled government was used to help the public. It was made to create jobs. And this is why the United States was able to recover after the Great Depression. So creating highways, so it also gave federal government more jurisdiction. So we have a national highway. It was real. It's such a big deal. There's a ton of programs. Okay. It also established the public works, and this is public works has to do with sewage and garbage collection, also stoplights, different things. So having just a standard of excellence throughout the United States just made it a lot easier. Also, public works individuals, whenever there's a recession or anything of that nature, there's always going to be jobs for that, because versus people who work in sales, where they depend if people other people have money, we still need roads. I mean, for those of you who live here in the Rio Grande Valley, Interstate 2, as you know, Expressway 83, there may have been problems with a recession going on, but that expressway was still under construction. There was still jobs for those construction workers. So this is actually a very good place to work in public works. It also allowed people to have unions. At one point, a former president in the 1800s had gotten a deal with Carnegie and J.P. Morgan and Chase, and they just didn't allow people to have unions, so people just had very low pay and not enough money to do things. Corporations have all power, public is being exploited. It allowing people to have unions allows them to demand higher pay. And safe working conditions. This is very important. If you're ever in a job and it is not safe to work there, it is now illegal at the level of the federal government. It's in direct violation of OSHA, of workplace protection. So this is very important. No employee of the working in the United States, you don't have to be a government employee for this. You should not be subject to unsafe working conditions. unless like you have like the proper gear in order to be in it. Like people who are welders, you need to be supplied or allowed to wear a helmet to protect your eyes. There's also like the homeowner's loan. Where were people living in at this point? People were living in cardboard boxes and like little tents. That's not a great way. There's always like rats and roaches and like a lot of like you could get robbed or assaulted. So like just having a home like four walls and a roof, it just provides a lot of comfort. Yes, certain bills might be like you might be juggling with them, but it just provides a lot of sense of help. I had friends who were homeless for a while, like when they were going to school, and they had to live in a car, and they said that whenever they finally got an apartment, they just felt so much safer. Like the fact that they had a door that they could lock and where they were no longer visible to people on the outside. So I encourage you to keep on going for your high school equivalency degree. That way you can get a better paying job for the sake of just having better things in life. You know, like certain commodities being like not luxuries, but things that just make your life a lot more comfortable. So then the owners loans. And then after this, so remember, this was still happening. The Dust Bowl happened from 1930 to 1936. So he had the New Deal like somewhere right here, 1933. There had to be a second New Deal. I know, right? So should we have called this one the Old Deal? The New Deal. Yeah, so we had to come up with the spring of 1935. Second New Deal. So with the spring of 1935, he provided jobs. So let's see. So he created something called the Works Progress Administration. And I know like a lot of like government bureaus and agencies just have some like really weird names. It's kind of hard to tell what it's for. Unlike like CDC, Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. I mean, that's kind of in the name. But this is a little more obscure, so let me explain. Here, it aside from providing jobs to unemployed people, so this is very similar to what we have in Texas Workforce Commission. By the way, if you are looking for a job, they still are open. Some of their locations probably aren't open, but they're still available. Like, if you go ahead and call them, they can still help you. I've been seeing a lot of new jobs pop up, so they're out there. So with this administration, the Works Progress Administration, they made jobs that weren't allowed to compete with the private industry. So this was mostly like construction. Or like building things like post offices. So it was like building post offices. And we can thank that for everyone who's like orders a lot of Amazon packages. We have a lot of post offices to help. Bridges, schools, highways, parks. And you may be wondering, like, well, I understand that they're building parks, it's creating a job, but are parks really necessary? Well, let me tell you this. Cities that don't have as many parks, there's a higher crime rate. Literally, there's been a ton of research that's gone into this, that the less parks you have available, or like square foot of like park space, like a per like amount of people, the crime rate will go up. So a lot of huge initiative that cities, states, and the federal government do is create parks. That way, there's things for people to do. For example, young people or even like teenagers or old, young adults, they'll want to go to the park. They'll exercise. They'll work out. They'll work out their frustrations. They'll play. They'll be distracted from their problems, or even like give them the resilience to work through their problems. This is why working out is such a great thing if you're going through a lot of problems. Compared to not having a park, you might be more inclined to go into crime because that would be the entertaining thing to do. This has been proven. Like parks decreases crime, and also like it provides a sense of like hope in the community. Pretty amazing. If that's a pretty great rate of reduced crime. It's just like a very indirect, very behind the scenes way, but it really does make a huge impact. And they also gave stimulus spending. Stimulus. Hey, whoa. Stimulus package sounds super familiar after COVID-19 here in the United States. Yes, President Trump signed a stimulus package. If you have not received yours, please go ahead and call to go ahead and see this. If you haven't done your income tax yet, go ahead and do so right now, because it might depend on having your income tax, like when it was submitted, and if you have direct deposit, and if it was mailed to your like the previous address associated with your income tax return. So this concept has existed before. It existed in the Second New Deal, and it's happened again with there was a recession. They'll give money out, and you're like, why is the government giving out money? Like, this is money from taxes. Why does it make any sense? Yes, it does. Because if you give money to people, they're gonna spend it, and if they spend it, they're gonna give it to they're gonna give money to a business, and that business hires employees. Like, it's a huge waterfall effect, or yeah, it's a waterfall effect, or like you can even consider it like a domino effect. Yes, there's gonna be some people who are gonna kind of like save the money, but the people who really need it, like people who need to like are behind like nowadays behind the car payments, their mortgage, their different bills that they have, or even like buying food and other supplies for the household, especially like if you have children. There are certain things that you might need to buy for them compared to their clothes. Children outgrow their clothes, so that's something else that's very necessary. Some people might have taken their stimulus check directly to Ross to buy a lot of things, but it created jobs for people who worked at Ross, who they also have families. So it really does help out the economy having this stimulus package. I know it's a lot of money that being invested, but it just draws and like kind of like gets the gears moving in the rest of the economy. So it worked before here. It's worked in previous other recessions before, like in the 80s and the 90s, and it's really helping out right now as well. Okay. And then and this was the end of the Great Depression. Actually, no. The Great Depression was truly ended when the for the United States when the United States was attacked by Japan. So let's so we have here December 7, 1941. We have the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There we go. With the bombing of Pearl Harbor, like, how does that affect like the Great Depression? The Great Depression was during about jobs, industry. Well, if there's one thing that creates a lot of business is war. You need people to manufacture to make food for the soldiers. So, United States enters the war, enters World War II. So you need uniforms. You need food for soldiers. You also need bullets. You need rubber for tires, etc. So there's a great need. So going on our rules of economy, the rules of supply and demand. This need created a demand. Which, when there's a demand for a product, like when there was hand sanitizer being, like a shortage of sanitizer and everyone wanted hand sanitizer, that's a really good time to start selling hand sanitizer. So there's a large demand for these products, for these different industries. Those industries and other businesses that began to join those industries because it was going to be very prosperous to be in that. So now there was now a supply. A reason created a reason to increase supply by employing more people so like yay. This was a very it really helped out the United States. It created a lot of jobs that otherwise weren't there. I mean, the biggest buyer at that point, the biggest customer was the United States. You can't, it's like if you're a grocery store and if no one's buying your food, then you have no product to sell. You have a product but it's not selling, you're not going to be making any more, selling any more goods or products. Here, in this situation with the United States entering World War II, now there's someone buying things, the United States government, and now there's something that can be sold. So let's say for all of you who like to do like side hustles and like gigs and those sort, if you're seeing that there's a lot of people who need their lawns cut, you can go ahead and see, hey, there's a demand for people that need to like cut their lawns. I can go ahead and meet that need and make some money. So this was now the end of the Great Depression. Now we need to talk about World War II. That will be in the next video.